You are about to view a factual representation of our legal battles. There is no commentary here, just unfiltered, unedited, and raw footage. We are taking you straight to the front lines of justice to observe the system exactly as it operates.
Sir, I stopped you for the damaged taillight. I also need clarification about your relationship with the minors in the vehicle.
They're family friends. I'm driving them home, that's all.
One of them said you're not his father. They're scared, sitting in silence while you're ordering them to stay quiet.
You playing with fire, deputy. You don't understand.
At 11:47 p.m. on a dark stretch of Highway 9 outside Crestfield, Georgia, a 29-year-old patrol deputy named Vanessa Cordero activated her lights behind a black Lincoln Continental drifting between lanes with a broken taillight. She expected nothing. A routine stop on a quiet overnight shift covering for a colleague on leave. The kind of call that usually ended with a warning and a wave. It didn't. The driver lowered his window slowly, already holding his license between two fingers, like a man who had done this before and never had to explain himself. He was well-dressed, calm, controlled. He identified himself before she could finish her opening line. Judge Clarence Devereaux, presiding judge of the 14th District Family Court. His voice carried authority, even on the shoulder of a county road at midnight. He told her the taillight had been an ongoing issue, that he was heading home from a family function and that she could let this one go. Cordero noted the tone. Not a request, an instruction. She kept her flashlight steady and moved it past the driver's seat toward the back of the vehicle. 4 children sat in the back, ages roughly 6 to 11. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Their eyes stayed low, fixed on their laps or the seat in front of them. One of them, a small girl in the rear passenger seat, was trembling visibly. Her hands were pressed flat between her knees. Cordero's training told her to note the detail and continue the stop. She did. She asked for registration. Devereaux handed it over without a word, his eyes watching her in the side mirror. She stepped back toward her cruiser, Bodycam recording, flashlight beam cutting across the dark interior of the Lincoln one more time. That was when a boy sitting behind the driver's seat turned his head slowly and looked directly into the lens mounted on her chest. His lips barely moved. That's not my dad. Judge Clarence Devereaux was 58 years old and had spent 22 of those years on the bench of the 14th District Family Court in Crestfield, Georgia. He was not just a judge in that town, he was an institution. His name appeared on the donor walls of 3 local nonprofits. He gave the keynote address at the county's annual Foster Care Appreciation Dinner every year for over a decade. He had been profiled twice by the Crestfield Herald as a pillar of justice and compassion, a man who had dedicated his career to protecting the most vulnerable children in the system. He ran a mentorship program for youth aging out of foster care, personally selecting participants and meeting with them regularly in his chambers. Local attorneys spoke about him with a mix of respect and caution. His courtroom was strict, his rulings were final, and his influence over custody placements, foster assignments, and juvenile case outcomes was nearly absolute. But beneath the accolades and the authority, there were things people noticed and never said aloud. Court clerks who saw certain children brought to his chambers outside of scheduled hearings. Social workers who were told specific children needed to be placed in homes Devereaux personally recommended. A bailiff who once saw a child leave the judge's office in tears and was told it was a difficult custody conversation. None of it was ever reported. None of it was ever questioned. The attorneys who practiced before him needed his favor. The social workers depended on his rulings. The community trusted his image. And Devereaux had spent 2 decades making sure that image never cracked. Until a deputy on a quiet highway asked the wrong question at the right time, and a boy in the back seat answered it. Officer Vanessa Cordero had never been the type to back down from authority. She was the daughter of a Guatemalan mechanic and a Dominican home health aide, who raised 3 children in a 2-bedroom apartment in Macon. She joined the Harmon County Sheriff's Office at 24, not because she came from a law enforcement family, but because of her cousin Sophia. Sophia had been placed in foster care at age 9 and bounced through 4 homes in 2 years. She came back different, quiet in a way that wasn't shyness. Cordero never got the full story. She didn't need to. She understood that the system had failed someone she loved, and she decided she would never be the person who looked the other way when something felt wrong. In 5 years on the job, she had built a reputation that made some colleagues uncomfortable. She once cited a county commissioner for DUI on a back road outside Harmon and refused to void the ticket when his chief of staff called the station. She filed a formal report on a fellow deputy who had roughed up a teenager during a traffic stop, even after being told it would make her unpopular. Her sergeant once described her in a performance review as someone who doesn't care about your title, just your behavior. It was meant as a compliment. Not everyone took it that way. That night, she was working a solo overnight shift on Highway 9. 12 hours, mostly silence, mostly empty road. She had pulled over 2 vehicles before the Lincoln. Both were routine. Both ended in under 5 minutes. When she saw the Continental drifting across the center line with a busted taillight, she expected the same. A warning, a signature, a good night. What she got instead was a man who told her who he was before she asked. 4 children who sat like statues, and a whisper from the back seat that made every nerve in her body fire at once. She didn't drive away from it. She called it in. Cordero walked back to the Lincoln and positioned herself at the rear passenger window. Her flashlight moved across the back seat slowly. The 4 children hadn't shifted since she first approached. The 2 boys sat behind the driver and front passenger seats. The older girl, roughly 11, sat in the middle. The younger girl, the one who had been trembling, was pressed against the far door. Cordero leaned slightly and spoke in a voice low enough that Devereaux would have had to strain to hear. "Hey, you kids doing okay back there?" No one answered. The older girl's eyes flicked toward the driver's seat and then back down. The younger girl's hands were still pressed between her knees. The boy who had whispered moments earlier stared straight ahead now, jaw tight, as if he regretted what he had said. Devereaux's voice came from the front. "Officer, they're tired. It's late. I'm transporting them home from a family gathering. They're foster children in my care." Cordero didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the children. "Do you have paperwork for them? Foster documentation, custody orders, anything with their names?" Devereaux paused for half a second. "Not on me. It's at my home. I'm a family court judge, officer. I don't carry case files in my vehicle." Cordero straightened. She noted the details her training told her to catalog. No seatbelts properly fastened on 3 of the 4 children. The younger girl was not wearing shoes. No booster seat for the smallest child. No documentation of any kind for 4 minors in a vehicle with an unrelated adult approaching midnight. She keyed her radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. I need a second unit to my location on Highway 9, mile marker 41. I have a welfare concern involving 4 minors. Devereaux's tone changed. "That's not necessary. I've told you who I am. You can verify it with 1 phone call." Cordero met his eyes through the window. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to stay in the vehicle. I've requested backup. We'll sort this out when they arrive." Devereaux stared at her for a long moment. Then he said something the Bodycam captured with perfect clarity. "You have no idea what you're doing, Deputy. You're going to regret this." Devereaux didn't wait for backup. He pulled out his phone, scrolled with the casual ease of a man who had powerful people on speed dial, and pressed call. Cordero watched from behind the vehicle, Bodycam recording. Her microphone picked up fragments. His tone shifted from calm to firm. The words "Patrol Deputy," "Highway 9," and "handled immediately" came through clearly. Within 2 minutes, her radio crackled. Sergeant Ray Loomis, her shift supervisor. "Vanessa, what's your status on Highway 9? She responded, "Welfare concern, 4 minors, no documentation. 1 child made a statement. I've requested backup." A pause. Then Loomis's voice dropped lower. "Listen, the driver is Judge Devereaux. He's known to the department. He sits on the county public safety board. You might want to extend professional courtesy and let him get those kids home." Cordero stared at the Lincoln's rear window. She could see the outline of the older girl's head, motionless. She keyed the radio. "Sergeant, a child told me the driver is not his father. I have 4 minors with no documentation, no proper restraints, approaching midnight. I'm not releasing this vehicle until backup confirms the welfare of these children. Silence. Then Loomis came back. Copy. Backup en route. Inside the Lincoln, Devereaux adjusted his rearview mirror. The Bodycam caught the reflection. He was watching the children. The older girl had her hand on the younger one's knee. The boy who had whispered sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Devereaux's expression was composed, but something had shifted behind his eyes. The confidence was still there, but alongside it sat something sharper. He turned slightly toward the back seat and spoke. The microphone picked up only part of it, but digital enhancement during the investigation would later recover the full sentence. Remember what I told you, not a word. Deputy Terrence Kamal arrived 11 minutes later. He stepped out slowly and walked toward Cordero with the expression of someone who already knew this was complicated. She briefed him in a low voice. Broken taillight, erratic driving, 4 children, no documentation, no shoes on the youngest, a child's whisper, and a driver who identified himself as a sitting judge before she'd asked his name. Kamal listened with his arms crossed. I know who he is, Vanessa. He's been at department dinners. The sheriff shakes his hand at the courthouse Christmas reception. Cordero didn't blink. Then you understand why this has to be done right. Kamal looked at the Lincoln, at the dark shapes in the back seat, at the man behind the wheel. What do you want to do? She told him. Ask Devereaux to step out. Request documentation. If he couldn't produce any, they were calling Child Protective Services and a forensic child advocacy officer. Kamal exhaled. You know what happens if we're wrong. Cordero's response was immediate. You know what happens if we're right and we drive away. He nodded once. They walked to the Lincoln together. Cordero tapped the window. Judge Devereaux, I'm asking you to step out of the vehicle. He opened the door slowly, straightening his jacket as he stood. His posture was controlled, expression flat. This is a mistake, he said. A serious mistake. Cordero replied without hesitation. Sir, do you have any legal documentation authorizing you to transport these children? His silence lasted 3 full seconds. The Bodycam counted them. I don't have to explain myself to a patrol deputy. I am a judge of the family court. Those children are under my supervision through a mentorship program I personally administer. Cordero asked one more time. Paperwork? Names? Case numbers? He had nothing. Cordero called Child Protective Services at 12:23 a.m. A forensic child advocacy officer named Imani Sutton arrived at the Harmon County Fire Station 40 minutes later. The children were transported separately from Devereaux and brought inside one at a time. Sutton was trained for this. Soft voice, open posture, no uniforms in the room. She started with the boy who had spoken on the highway. His name was Terrell. He was 8 years old. He had been in the foster system since age 4. He told Sutton he was taken from his group home 3 days earlier by a woman he didn't know who said he was going to a special family visit. He said the man in the car told him to call him Sir. He said they stayed in a house with no other adults. He said he didn't want to go back. Sutton moved to the oldest girl, 11 years old. Her name was Kiara. She didn't speak at first. She sat with her arms wrapped around herself, eyes on the floor. When Sutton asked if she had been to the man's house before, Kiara nodded slowly. How many times? Kiara held up 4 fingers. Sutton asked what happened there. Kiara used language that triggered mandatory reporting protocols immediately. A 6-year-old boy in the 3rd interview barely spoke at all. He flinched when a male firefighter walked past the open door. The 4th child, a 7-year-old girl named Amara, didn't answer questions directly. Sutton gave her crayons and paper. She drew a picture of a room with no windows and a large bed. She drew a tall figure standing next to it. Sutton stepped out of the room, closed the door behind her, and called the district attorney's office. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. We need a warrant tonight. A judge from the neighboring district was woken at 2:41 a.m. to sign the warrant. No one in Crestfield's court system could be involved. By 4:15 a.m., a team of investigators from the Harmon County Sheriff's Office and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation entered Devereaux's residence, a well-kept colonial on a tree-lined street in the town's wealthiest neighborhood. The front rooms looked normal. Family photos on the mantel, legal texts on the shelves, awards and framed newspaper clippings on the study wall. The basement told a different story. Behind a locked interior door, investigators found a furnished room with bedding for multiple children, small clothing folded in stacks, personal items belonging to minors, electronic devices concealed in a floor safe, and a ledger-style notebook with entries spanning years, each referencing children by initials, dates, and coded notations that investigators would later decipher with the help of child exploitation analysts. Digital forensics was called in before sunrise. The scope of the investigation expanded within hours. Devereaux was arrested at the scene. He was still wearing the suit from the traffic stop. He said nothing when they put him in handcuffs. His attorney arrived within the hour, demanded to know the charges, and was handed a warrant that ran 4 pages. Outside, the first light of morning broke across Crestfield. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as a man they had admired for 2 decades was guided into the back of a federal vehicle. None of them spoke. None of them yet understood what had been happening inside that house. But the children did. And now, finally, someone had listened. The investigation into how Devereaux operated moved fast once investigators understood what they were looking at. He hadn't acted on impulse. He had built a system. As presiding judge of the 14th District Family Court, Devereaux had direct authority over custody placements, foster assignments, and juvenile case outcomes. For over a decade, he had used that power to position himself as the final word on where vulnerable children ended up. He cultivated relationships with specific social workers who processed his recommendations without question. He maintained ties to 2 group home administrators who flagged children with no stable family connections, the ones least likely to be missed or believed. His mentorship program, celebrated publicly as a model of judicial compassion, served as the pipeline. Children selected for the program were brought to his chambers for meetings that no one supervised. Some were assigned to foster homes connected to people he controlled. Court records later showed that Devereaux had personally intervened in the placement of at least 19 children over 7 years, overriding caseworker recommendations in 12 of those instances. Each time, the reassignment moved the child closer to his reach. The social workers who facilitated it fell into 2 categories. Some were manipulated, pressured by the authority of a judge they couldn't afford to cross. Others knew. They looked the other way because Devereaux controlled their caseloads, their courtroom outcomes, and in some cases, their careers. One social worker would later testify that she had raised the concern once and was told by her supervisor to drop it. The supervisor's explanation was brief. "He's a judge. You're not." That was the end of it. When news of Devereaux's arrest reached the Crestfield legal community, the silence was immediate and telling. Attorneys who had practiced before him for years offered no comment. 2 social workers connected to his cases were placed on administrative leave within 48 hours. The director of the county's Child Welfare Office submitted a resignation letter with no public explanation. A local journalist named Franklin Cobb, who had twice profiled Devereaux as a community hero, began receiving anonymous tips within days. Former court staff, foster parents, a retired bailiff who said he once saw a child leave the judge's chambers crying and was told not to ask about it. Cobb published his first investigative piece within 2 weeks. It detailed 3 formal complaints filed against Devereaux over the previous decade with the state's Judicial Conduct Board. All 3 had been dismissed after what the board described as preliminary review. One of the complainants was a foster mother named Gloria Vance. She had reported concerns about a child's behavior after visits connected to the mentorship program. She described nightmares, withdrawal, language that alarmed her. She was told she was being alarmist. 6 months later, her foster license was revoked on a paperwork technicality. She lost custody of 2 children she had been raising for 3 years. Vance told Cobb she had always believed the revocation was retaliation. Now, reading the charges against Devereaux, she was certain. The system didn't fail those children by accident, she said. It failed them because it protected him. When the article ran, the Judicial Conduct Board issued a statement announcing an internal review. By then, the FBI was already in Crestfield. The FBI and Department of Justice opened a joint federal investigation 9 days after the traffic stop. What began as a single incident on Highway 9 had expanded into something the U.S. Attorney's Office described internally as systemic and predatory. Federal agents seized Devereaux's electronic devices, court records, personal correspondence, and financial statements. Digital forensics uncovered encrypted files and communications with individuals in 2 neighboring states. Financial records showed a pattern of payments to the group home administrators who had funneled children into placements Devereaux controlled. The money was structured in small amounts, routed through a nonprofit Devereaux had established under the umbrella of his mentorship program. On paper, the funds were labeled as youth enrichment grants. In practice, they were payments for access. Federal prosecutors convened a grand jury within 3 weeks. The indictment, when it came, was 34 counts: trafficking, exploitation, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, wire fraud connected to the nonprofit, civil rights violations under color of law. 2 social workers and 1 group home administrator were named as co-conspirators. Devereaux was denied bail. His attorney, a high-profile defense lawyer from Atlanta, called it a rush to judgment driven by media pressure. The U.S. attorney held a brief press conference outside the federal courthouse. She stood behind a podium with no notes and spoke directly into the cameras. This office has investigated many cases involving abuse of power. This is among the most disturbing. A sitting judge used the institution designed to protect children as a tool to exploit them. We will pursue accountability at every level. Devereaux watched the press conference from a federal holding facility on a wall-mounted television. According to a corrections officer who was present, he showed no reaction. He sat with his hands folded, expression blank, staring at the screen as if watching someone else's life collapse. The federal trial began 4 months later and lasted 5 weeks. The courtroom was full every day. Prosecutors opened with the Bodycam footage from Highway 9. The jury watched in silence as the Lincoln Continental rolled to a stop on the dark shoulder. They heard Cordero's voice, calm and professional. They saw the children's faces illuminated briefly by her flashlight. And they heard the boys whisper, "That's not my dad." Several jurors looked down. One pressed a hand to her mouth. The prosecution then built its case methodically. Forensic evidence from the residents, testimony from child psychologists who had evaluated the victims, digital evidence extracted from encrypted files, financial records mapping payments to co-conspirators, and the testimony of the children themselves, delivered via closed-circuit video so they would not have to face the man who had hurt them. 8 victims were identified in total, spanning 7 years. Each child had entered Devereaux's orbit through the family court system he controlled. Each had been selected for his mentorship program. Each had been placed in homes or facilities connected to people who answered to him. The defense attempted every available angle. They argued the children's testimony had been riven. The judge ruled the broken taillight and erratic driving provided clear, probable cause. They argued the children's testimony had been coached. Prosecution experts dismantled the claim, with forensic interview recordings showing open-ended, non-leading questioning. They claimed the digital evidence was circumstantial. Federal analysts walked the jury through file structures, timestamps, and encryption methods that proved deliberate concealment. A cooperating social worker took the stand and described in detail how Devereaux selected children and how she was too afraid of his power to refuse. Her voice broke once. She did not ask for sympathy. The jury gave her none. The jury deliberated for 1 day, guilty on all 34 counts. The courtroom was still when the verdict was read. No gasps, no outbursts, just silence and the sound of the court clerk's voice moving through each count, one after another, the word guilty repeating like a hammer on stone. Devereaux sat motionless, hands flat on the table, eyes forward. His attorney closed his folder and said nothing. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. A senior federal judge was brought in from out of state to preside. Before the sentence was delivered, 3 of the older victims submitted impact statements. One was read aloud by a prosecutor because the victim could not speak without breaking down. The statement described years of abuse by someone the system told them to trust. Someone who wore a robe and sat above everyone else in the room. Someone who decided where children went and who they belonged to. The sentencing judge addressed Devereaux directly. You were entrusted with the most sacred responsibility the legal system can offer: the protection of children who had no one else to speak for them. You weaponized that trust. You used the institution designed to shield the most vulnerable members of this society as your personal instrument of predation. There is no sentence this court can impose that fully accounts for what you have taken from these children. Devereaux was sentenced to 67 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. He showed no visible emotion. At 58 years old, the sentence was effectively life. He was led from the courtroom in shackles, past the families of victims, past the journalists, past the cameras. He did not look at anyone. The door closed behind him. His robe, his title, his reputation, his freedom. All of it gone. The fallout reshaped Crestfield from the inside out. The State Judicial Conduct Board was restructured after an independent audit revealed systemic failures in handling complaints against sitting judges. 3 board members resigned. New legislation was introduced requiring independent oversight of all family court placements and mandatory cross-referencing of judicial involvement in foster care assignments. The county's child welfare department was placed under state supervision for a minimum of 5 years. Internal emails uncovered during the federal investigation showed that supervisors within the department had been aware of irregularities in Devereaux's placement recommendations, but chose not to act. One email sent from a senior case manager to the department director read simply, "He's the judge. We don't question the judge." That email was cited in the governor's public statement calling for wholesale reform. The 2 cooperating social workers received reduced sentences. One was given 3 years. The other received probation and mandatory testimony in related proceedings. The group home administrator who had facilitated access to children was sentenced to 12 years. Gloria Vance, the foster mother whose license had been revoked after she raised concerns, was publicly reinstated. The state issued a formal apology. She regained custody of the 2 children she had lost and was invited to serve on the newly formed Civilian Oversight Panel for Child Welfare. Officer Vanessa Cordero was recognized by the State Attorney General's office for her actions during the traffic stop. She declined all media interviews. A single quote appeared in an internal department memo distributed to every sheriff's office in the state. "I just did what the training says. If something doesn't feel right, you don't drive away from it." The Bodycam footage from Highway 9 was viewed over 4 million times in the weeks following the trial. Legal analysts, child advocacy organizations, and law enforcement training programs dissected it frame by frame. But the moment everyone returned to was the same. A dark highway, a flashlight beam sweeping across the back seat of a Lincoln Continental, 4 children sitting in silence, and a boy who turned his head, looked into the camera mounted on a deputy's chest, and whispered 5 words that broke the case open. "That's not my dad." Without that whisper, Devereaux might still be on the bench. Without Cordero's refusal to defer to a powerful man's title, the children might still be in his reach. Without the body cam preserving the truth in a format that could not be denied, rewritten, or buried, the system that protected him might never have been forced to answer for what it allowed. The children are in protective care. They are receiving long-term psychological support. The boy who spoke has not been publicly identified, and will not be. He is reported to be doing well. His name will not appear in this story because he has already done the bravest thing anyone could ask of him. He spoke when silence was safer, and someone listened. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.
Welcome. Our objective is clear: to pursue the truth and hold established power to account. We follow the paper trail because the official records never lie. Thank you for watching and seeking the facts with us.